So today I want to share with you a product session I had earlier today with Ross Mayfield,
doing the hard work at the very beginning of constructing things around customer pain.
a really seasoned entrepreneur who's been building products since the early or mid 90s in the Valley. He's been all the way through the dot-com bubble.
We had $1 billion market cap and only $60,000 in revenue.
And he's currently working on Pingpad, which is a collaborative idea sharing and collection software that is funded by some of the best VCs in the Valley, including Greylock, Floodgate, the Crunch Fund, and 500 Startups. And he also has angel investors such as Mark Pincus, founder of Singa, on the cap table. What we're going to do in this session, he's going to walk me through the public product first.
Pingpad is both a bot and it's also a web app.
From the first mile of the product through to the entire feature set. And then in a off-the-record session, he walks me through a private beta product iteration that he's currently been working on. And I think it's a really great session. In the end, we cover some high-level topics. I think there's a lot of invaluable lessons for other founders as well. I have to apologize. I accidentally left one of the additional audio sources on, so the sound is really off. I'll try to improve on that the next time, but please give it a listen. And let's stick right in. I'm here with Ross Mayfield, who's a serial entrepreneur who's been in the Valley since the late 90s. And he's going to walk us through his founder journey. And then we're going to dive into the product. So why don't you start off and give us some background?
That sounds great. So I've actually been here longer. I'm a Palo Alto native. Then, let's see, I started off my career actually in the nonprofit sector, trying to change the world for good in that way. Then moved into the public sector, was an advisor to the president of Estonia. When I was in Estonia, I started an ISP, a web design company, worked on a telecom group's IPO. The big crash happened, the first of many crashes I've been through. When the Asian currency crisis trickled over into the Russian stock market. That was a good time for me to come back home. Co-founded a company with a guy named Sean Whalen called Rate Exchange. That was a B2B exchange for trading telecom capacity. This was a bubble. We were in like the hottest space all of a sudden. It started off with, let's make a website and post wholesale prices for telephony and long haul bandwidth of just bids and apps. And then over time, it became more of a vision of how do we help companies manage price risk, right? And building out a full-on bandwidth exchange with derivatives, a forward market, right? And a spot market for real-time delivery. We had $1 billion market cap and only $60,000 in revenue. Our top customers at the end of this was Enron, WorldCom, and Tyco.
Wow.
The ashes of the company ended up being pivoted by another CEO to become an investment bank, of all things. Then I went on, did a couple little things. But I'm best known in the Valley for Social Text, which was the first Enterprise 2.0 company or enterprise social software, right? And that was a wonderful journey. We pioneered, we created the first enterprise wiki. It evolved into this platform that included everything to allow social collaboration and then also kind of intranet-wide, making your intranet social. So social networking, Twitter-style microblogging, etc. Right? So Slack is part of the same lineage of software that we started back in 2002. We ended up selling that to a company called PeopleFluent as HR software. I then went on to SlideShare, the YouTube for PowerPoint.
Yes.
You had a great exit there, sold it to LinkedIn. At the end of my tour of duty, there I was a product manager working on LinkedIn events, which is now finally getting shipped by somebody else. The thing that the point in highlighting this part of the background as it relates to the startup I'm working on now is just a simple thing. So if there's a thing that I love to build, it's collaboration software. It's a real fulfilling occupation, right? Helping people get things done together, helping people collaborate. But when I was working in a world-class product management org, what I saw was all the PMs basically being blinded by data, right? You could spin up experiments and optimize and A/B test anything all day long, right? But it was very rare that people were actually getting out of the building talking to customers. And so it turns out that what is it? Only 7% of a product manager's time is actually spent engaging with customers. And part of that is just there's a lot of demands on the job, right? But in the end, this matters in a couple places, especially. Like if you're an early stage founder working to find product market fit, you're not going to optimize your way to product market fit. You're going to find it by getting a really understanding and insight into problems, right? What is the real problem? What value proposition can you construct by having a deep understanding of the right problem for the right segment of customers? I think in the Valley we have a bunch of myths, like the Steve Jobs inventor myth, right? Where you know better, that customers don't know what to ask for, that kind of stuff, right? We also, I think, lean startup movement has been all about like lots of fail fast experiments, right? And it's good to have that pace of iteration, right? But these are all, and also we have this obsession with data, right? But all this stuff kind of blinds us from the real basic thing of, in the end, you are selling something for a customer and they have a problem, and you can spend a lot of time chasing the wrong problem or not understanding it deep enough to be able to construct the right solution, right? This also, happens in larger companies, larger product teams as well, right? It's just a better example to talk about early stage product market fit finding, right? So that kind of brings me to Pingpad. Maybe one way to do this is, let me just jump right in and I'll illustrate things for you. So let me go ahead and share screen. So Pingpad is collaborative product discovery. We're all about mostly one use case. It's how do you capture customer problems and then prioritize which ones you're going to solve. Our approach for this is, so it turns out that this is the number one problem in product management. It's how am I going to get the market feedback that I need to drive my roadmap? And I've gone off and talked to like 150 product managers since focusing on this. And what we generally find is product managers not spending enough time with customers, not just to identify the problem, but to prioritize problems, right? Collaboratively with them. Second, there's this kind of untapped opportunity. This is more for larger companies where you have the field, sales, support, customer success, etc. They're engaging with customers, talking about problems all day long, and they're hearing why things aren't working to them or other problems that could be solved. But there's no efficient channel to share that into product management. And then the third part is prioritization methodologies are all over the map, right? It's rare that I find a product team that's got really good discipline for looking at which problems to solve and why, right? As they're deciding what to build. So our approach, so I'm going to show you, I'm about to show you a product that'll show you this, that will have these three statements represented in the demo. We have a second product, which I'm going to talk about in a that's in private data. And we're going to talk about these separately so we can edit it out. We're not ready to launch it yet, right? But so for the mainstay product, for Pingpad, what we do is we help you discover customer problems from the field, from your team through Slack. We've got a rich collaboration tool set that lets you collaborate to define those problems. And then we help you with visual prioritization using a method to score idea cards and make decisions of what to build and why, right? Now, this, of course, in the modern age, this has to fit within your existing tool set and workflow. So sometimes you discover a problem, for example, that's a bug. You just need to get that into Jira and get the thing fixed. Other times you happen across a problem that is something that's a whole new feature or a whole new product, and that needs to be planned. And so that's where it kind of feeds into a second use case, which is using Pingpad for a Kanban-style roadmap, whether it be temporal or thematic. And I probably won't demo that today. But let's go ahead and jump in, and I'll just show you how this works. So somebody could say, the customer says that it's too bright outside, right? A problem statement is shared in Slack, let's say, by someone on the customer success team. Now, in this case, these anecdotes about the full customer journey are happening all day long in Slack, and they disappear. They disappear below the fold. Search is great if you know what you're looking for, but one of the problems with Slack in general is there's a lack of structure. So let's take this message and contribute it as an idea card. For the idea card, we're answering this question. The question is, what problem does this idea solve? And we'll just shorten this down, hit save. Now we've got it in a card format. There's a lot of things that we can do with the card. I'm not going to do that in Slack. I'm not going to do that now, but I'll just highlight one thing. We give you a single focus discussion thread for every idea card, where I could say something like this on Slack, and any contributor to the card is notified in the threads part of Slack to be brought into this conversation. This conversation is synced, not just Pingpad is both a bot and it's also a web app. So the web app, you sign in with your Slack identity. You can create a board per channel. But by default, when you add it to your Slack, we apply this one template.
I checked that out. I actually created an account and played around with it for half an hour or so. So it's really great for you to now walk me through the product journey the other way around, because I landed on this board and I felt like it felt like very much like a Trello experience, and I couldn't really see like the journey that you described before, going from Slack, and I tried to like reverse engineer this journey. So it's interesting to see that that the way that you describe it is the other way around. So yeah.
And that's actually very good feedback for me about my onboarding, which needs another revision. So new ideas come into the new ideas list on the left from Slack. Here I've documented my strategic product themes. I have 3 of them. I might, let's say, start by doing just a quick triage and say, you know what, this idea, this is something that I think would be, this is something that's relatively small effort, right? It's got large value if we solve it. But I really don't have a lot of confidence in my estimates right now because I haven't even really dug into it. So I'm just going to mark this as, let's say, a 10% confidence, right? So this is a basic scoring. I'm going to go ahead and drag this over into the research phase to say, okay, this is something that we need to dig deeper on. We open up the idea card, and what you get is here we have that same synced discussion thread with a link back to the original context in Slack. And I might ask a clarifying question, like, how hot? And so the approach is you discuss the problem, you define the problem in the document editor. It's a real-time document editor, and you can have many people talking at once, right? Or typing at once. You may need to illustrate by uploading screenshots, attachments, files, etc. And then if you're in a larger team, let's say with a couple product managers on the same board, you may want to assign it to somebody, and you could give it a due date. There's a bunch of underlying kind of task management and project management features that help this work. And also, as we're using the web app, when I do things like assign this to somebody, that person gets a direct message in Slack saying, hey, you have a new task assigned to you. We send a copy of your to-do list to you at 8:30 every morning through Slack. And kind of keeps things on track, right? Automates a little bit of the communication. Down here, we have what are called custom fields. I've already used 3 of them: effort, value, and confidence. Let's bump up the confidence level a little bit because we've dug into this a little bit more. And this is entirely customizable. Sometimes teams will use things like, let's categorize this by type, let's say feature versus bug. Sometimes you may want to tag it with a team. Most common is to use either your customer list, if it's a small list, or personas or segments, because who has the problem matters as much as what the problem is. And then we also want to tag this with a strategic theme. Let's call this a UX issue, right? So the purpose of adding all of this structure onto the card and getting these pretty colorful labels actually comes down to filtering. So now when I want to prioritize, let's say I want to just hone in and look at all the ideas that are of large value, right? And say, okay, this is great. It's worth let's move it into the prioritize stage. And then finally, after I made a good decision that we've documented it, we know what it is, we want to go ahead and act on it, I move it into roadmap ready, and I mark it complete. When I do that, it sends a direct message to the person who contributed the idea saying, hey, that problem your customer was describing, we're actually taking an action, right? So that's the primary use case. I'm skipping steps, like I could have sent the card content and conversation and metadata into a Jira ticket with a click. I could also now copy this over to a roadmap board.
For me, maybe to just back up a few steps, I think it's very wise to sort of go where the conversation is. Basically the product manager conversations are taking place on Slack effectively. And then basically from product side, use that as a distribution tool to your own platform. For me, the question that came up was, what's the ideal product management team size that you're thinking about before this, like the effects? Because what I basically realize is that when I'm on Slack, oftentimes I end up having like very deep conversations with like 2 or 3 people. So how do you think about like, what's the sweet spot in terms of like team size where the effects really kick in?
Right. So I think you're talking about, so I'll give you an example. One of my customers is, that I think of as the ideal customer profile. It's a security software company. They've got about 500 employees, product management group of about between 5 to 10, right? And, as with a lot of startups, generally you start with, you start solving problems for smaller teams and you keep pushing up the boundary, right? There's still things, if I was going to make this really work well for a larger scale, there'd be a different set of roles, permissions, things like that, that would be necessary, right? Those are things that we'll build towards, but it's still like get the core product value working for smaller groups. The other part that is important is we found customer success where we have a product manager will start on their own, using it as kind of in a single player mode, as a way of collecting research.
That's interesting.
Good, right? Off of Slack and off of their own interviews that they're doing with customers. Then after they have some success and they've got, basic set of idea cards and prioritization methodology, etc. Then what they'll do is they'll turn to start engaging the field, probably customer success first, then towards support, then towards sales, etc. And, gaining, and, there's certainly, once you start opening up a new channel for certain kinds of employees to be able to share feedback to improve product, it opens it up. But there's some techniques that we have to use to try to encourage successful adoption, right? Where it shifts from the product manager vacuuming things off of Slack to other people sharing through Slack onto the board.
So that's interesting for me, because I think now, so I personally find the single player mode perspective the most interesting, because then you can basically, in my head, I can look at it as like a Pinterest for Slack, where basically I go in and I find something interesting, and I basically I record my because in the beginning it was basically Pinterest was like a place for you to be the hunter gatherer of like your online experience, and that's similar, and that's something that really didn't come across on the landing page journey, with like Scott Belsky always talks about, like the first mile on the product, where people are vain and selfish and they just want to know how does it help me, and I would personally hone in also in the way of basically on the landing page on the landing flow, hone in more on the single player mode. But it's interesting that you mentioned this. Okay.
It's good move. It's good feedback. Okay, so let me shift gears. I want to show you a new product. We're not ready to talk about it publicly, right? So this will be the marker, and then we can come back. So
let me ask you some more like high level questions. I think when you founded it, you weren't sure of whether or not you should take this platform risk, building it sort of like adjacent to Slack,
right?
And then I saw this post that you did on Medium a year ago, when basically when Atlassian sort of admitted defeat. So now that we have Slack with the Slack direct listing or IPO, how do you view this whole platform risk?
I think it's part of our times, right? Where in many businesses, not just the stuff that we're doing, there are platforms to contend with and take advantage of as much as you can, right? I would say that Slack has a really healthy, good ecosystem where they're providing functional benefits. We have things like single sign-on. It supports a different kind of use case to directly tie into conversation. I don't think that Slack has done a good job yet. Maybe they'll figure this out. They've been talking about it for a long time, at helping create a real distribution advantage for the ecosystem of apps, right? There's very separate experience from using Slack to adding an app or discovering an app, right? I also think if I was to go back, I don't know that I would have bet 100% on Slack, because also that limits your distribution, right? You can only, like right now, the only way to add our flagship app is by adding it to your Slack. I would have created our own independent method for somebody to sign up, start using it, right? And that's a little bit in retrospect, but also, as you just learned a little bit about what I'm doing, just kind of hedge my bets a little bit, right? And I think, to all credit, like Slack's done an amazing job. They have realized a lot of the promise of social software, and they're bringing it into another level of mainstream success. Collaboration and knowledge sharing at the team scale, as opposed to bigger department or company wide, has been a dream for a long time, right? And then it's just been locked in email, and there is definitively a viable alternative, right? It's not to say that there will be competitors that will undercut what they're doing at some point. There'll be there's always communication modalities are changing all the time, right? And just keep watching what's happening on the consumer side. There'll be some new trend. They'll get big enough. They'll be blind to it, and there'll be another opportunity for the landscape to shift.
The way that I view it is you have carved out sort of a perfect, like, if we think about the whole sort of pie of corporate communication, then we have like product management is like one carve out that you basically hone in and build a much better feature set. And how have you thought about like how to build distribution into the product?
Yeah, the approach is, what's nice about the focus on product management is it gives me a way where I can sell both from the top down and from the bottom up. I do think you want to do both. And then you can kind of land and expand in the account. I don't think we're doing a good enough job in letting the product distribute itself through Slack to reach other groups, right? That is one of the goals that we have in the flagship product. Pingpad actually started as a mobile consumer collaboration app, right? And then we pivoted into the enterprise, recognizing that we were not going to get to the millions upon millions of consumer users because collaboration is not going to be a daily activity for a consumer, right? And people are lazy and they default to messaging, right? So our hypothesis was wrong. We needed to pivot. But the interesting part was, in the end, for a startup to be successful, it has to have find a distribution channel in which it has an advantage, right? If not, you end up creating and the only time that you can really do this is by the way that you shape the core attributes of the product at the very beginning. I'll give you an example. So Evernote went through a process where they created a great single player mode note-taking app. And then they started to realize that there was a lot more revenue in being a collaborative app. And they were trying to bend their features much later on to create something that they could go and sell to enterprises, to teams, right? In the end, they couldn't do that because the core structure of the product, the nature of the product, was not designed to be collaborative, right? And that was the original insight that we saw for Pingpad as a mobile consumer app was, hey, let's design an Evernote designed for group use from the beginning, right? Yes. And there are some, like Sachin Redkey as a good example of one that's succeeding at a certain level of doing this with NoteJoy right now. And so it again comes to this one thing. At the very early stage, it is about getting deep with customers and their problems, solving something that is a significant pain. It doesn't have to be a painkiller. It can be an addictive vitamin, right? And then also something that increases its value if your customers share it, or they have value, or they feel they're getting enough value that they want to share it, right? Yes. And the last part of this is there are going to be other distribution hacks. Sometimes those distribution hacks happen from the rise of new platforms, right? And you have to kind of be opportunistic, test, and invest in those directions to try to ride whatever that channel might be, right? But in the end, it just kind of comes back to doing the hard work at the very beginning of constructing things around customer pain.
Yes.
In a way that they will want to help share the solution.
What I can tell you from like my experience with this session also, and like having played with the product beforehand, is I mean, like for superhuman, which is the talk of the town these days.
Yeah.
There, I mean, the story was basically that you would have to meet the founder, and he would walk you through the product in a long session. And I feel like your product needs a lot of handholding in the beginning, because it's quite feature rich, and and just having an explainer video could go half the way already, because a couple of things that I couldn't figure out on my own, and I'm very product focused. Although I'm not a heavy Slack user myself, I have to say. So it might be very different for a senior product manager at one of the large companies. But for me, it felt like it needed a lot of handholding, and like the session that we just had changed my perspective on the product as well.
Cool.
So that's maybe that's
good feedback. And it's true.
So this is it for today. Please join me next time when I'm joined again by another great founder or investor talking about their journey. Cheers, guys.